If you believe in yourself and you follow your gut and your instincts, you're able to live with the results. But if you listen to somebody and they steer you in the wrong direction and you lose out, that's very hard to live with.
But in the end, he had, like 24 hours before he was killed, he had basically lost it and said, I'm leaving the pro-Israel cause. And this is before he's going to go on a nationwide campus tour where he's going to be bombarded with questions about Israel. This could have been potentially disastrous for the Israel lobby and the cause of Israel in the United States to have its most important non-governmental Gentile asset actually criticizing or entertaining criticism of Israel at these gigantic kind of arena size event.
Charlie sustained this gunshot wound just to the left of the midline of where your larynx sits, right about here. And then almost immediately you see this flow of blood, and it's kind of a dark venous kind of blood, which might give I don't have any records in front of me right now, might give an indication that this was a venous strike in addition to maybe an arterial strike. Arterial blood kind of pumps out this neuromuscular response that you see immediately with Charlie, where his posture changes, kind of grips, I think it's one hand, and he goes into this kind of contracted appearance, and then he falls over. That's, and I do believe this. I do believe that it was a catastrophic wound. I think that even if you had a team of cardiothoracic surgeons that were standing by, neurosurgeons augmented by various, if you had them standing physically there, he would not have survived this round.
The digital age has rewritten the rules of tragedy. Where once a public figure's passing was marked by a solemn news bulletin and a period of collective mourning, it now ignites a simultaneous, global, and fractious inquest. The death of Charlie Kirk, the founder and fiery engine of Turning Point USA, was one such event. The initial headlines on that fateful day spoke of a medical emergency, a sudden incident at a Utah event. The language was sterile, designed to contain the chaos. But in the vacuum of concrete details, a different story began to metastasize, one not of accident, but of design, not of chaos, but of chilling precision. This is the story of that investigation, a real-time unraveling of a narrative that has fractured the public sphere and posed terrifying questions about the intersection of politics, money, and power. It is a story built on leaked messages, anomalous behavior, and the relentless pursuit of truth by those who believe the official story is a carefully constructed facade. The public's first response was an outpouring of shock and grief. Social media platforms became digital vigils, flooded with tributes and expressions of disbelief for a man who had been a constant, provocative presence in the political discourse. Colleagues, political allies, and thousands of young conservatives expressed a profound sense of loss, painting a picture of a leader cut down in his prime. The silence from official channels in the immediate aftermath felt respectful, if agonizing for those seeking answers. But that silence soon began to curdle into suspicion. The official statements from law enforcement and event organizers were remarkably sparse. They confirmed a fatality and an ongoing investigation, but specifics about the nature of the medical emergency were conspicuously absent. For a figure of Kirk's stature, a man whose every move was typically documented and disseminated, this opacity was the first anomaly. In the absence of fact, the human mind, particularly one grieving and distrustful of institutions, begins to construct its own logic. It was in this fertile ground of uncertainty that a seemingly unrelated data point resurfaced, a clue that would become the first thread in a much larger and darker tapestry. From the vast archive of his own media empire, a clip from Charlie Kirk's show, recorded a mere 24 hours before his death, began to circulate with renewed and ominous significance. To his regular viewers, the segment was jarring. Kirk, a long-standing, unequivocal supporter of Israel, was engaged in a dialogue that struck a different chord. The familiar, firm rhetoric was softened, replaced by talk of complex geopolitical nuances and the need for a more balanced approach. At the time of its original airing, it was noted as a curious, perhaps strategic, pivot. In the grim retrospect following his death, it took on a more sinister hue. Was this a simple evolution of thought? An intellectual exploration? Or was it a public renunciation of a previously unshakable position, a move that would inevitably create powerful and potentially vengeful enemies? This question, whispered at first in online forums and private messages, would not dangle for long before a formidable force grabbed hold of it and pulled with immense strength. Candace Owens, a fellow firebrand and colleague, did not merely eulogize her friend. She launched an inquest. In a video statement that would amass millions of views within hours, Owens presented a front of composed grief, but her eyes burned with a cold fury. She expressed her personal loss before systematically dismantling the official narrative. She labeled the accident theory a comfortable lie, a narrative designed for public consumption to avoid panic and obscure a darker truth. Her allegation was stark and uncompromising. Charlie Kirk had been the victim of a professional, orchestrated hit, meticulously planned and disguised to look like a tragic mishap. This was not, she insisted, the work of a lone, unstable individual or a simple failure of security. It was the work of professionals, a surgical strike intended to eliminate a specific political force. The digital ecosystem shattered. The unified front of mourning splintered into a battlefield. New phrases and slogans were coined, instantly trending, symbols of the deep schism in public perception. The court of public opinion was now in session, and the verdicts were passionately divided. On one side, a growing army of believers rallied behind Owens. They saw her as a brave truth-teller, a lone voice willing to speak power to truth in the face of a coordinated silence. On the other side, a chorus of condemnation decried the allegations as ghoulish exploitation. For them, Owens was not a seeker of truth, but a provocateur, leveraging tragedy to fuel the very divisions that Kirk himself had often navigated. But Owens was not content to rely on rhetoric alone. She presented what she claimed was her first piece of corroborating evidence, analysis from unnamed medical experts, specifically forensic pathologists who had reviewed limited, leaked information about the incident. Their alleged conclusions sent a new wave of chills through the investigation. The fatal wound, they reportedly claimed, displayed characteristics inconsistent with a chaotic or accidental cause. They pointed to signs of trained precision, an impact so targeted and efficient that it suggested immediate incapacitation, the hallmark of a professional operative. The sterile term, medical emergency, was now being replaced, in the public imagination, with the terrifying image of a calculated termination. The conversation had shifted from whether it was a murder to who could have carried out such a flawless, clinical act. Just as the public was grappling with the medical implications, a new and unexpected voice amplified the signal, sending shockwaves through entirely new demographics. Ice Cube, the rap icon and political maverick, entered the fray. His theory, delivered to his millions of followers, was even more expansive and terrifying. He did not point solely to domestic political opponents. He alleged the involvement of foreign intelligence agencies, suggesting Kirk's shift on Israel had made him a target of international scope. In a move that left political commentators reeling, Ice Cube then pointed a finger inward, directly implicating factions within Kirk's own organization, Turning Point USA. The plot was no longer a simple story of an external assassin. It was becoming a labyrinthine tale of internal conspiracy and external influence, a shadow war playing out within the halls of power Kirk himself had helped build. The story had irrevocably shifted. It was now about power, influence, and the dark, interconnected corners where they meet. The idea that this could be an inside job, a betrayal from within the ranks of his own movement, added a layer of profound psychological horror to the physical tragedy. As the theory of a vast conspiracy gained traction, Candace Owens returned to the public stage, this time not just with words, but with documents. She released a series of leaked screenshots purportedly from internal Turning Point USA messaging channels. The chats, dated in the weeks leading up to Kirk's death, revealed not a unified front, but a simmering cauldron of tension. A specific name was highlighted, repeated, and circled in the evidence she presented: Josh Hammer, a prominent commentator and advisor to the organization. The messages showed heated, at times acrimonious, disagreements over public strategy, political alignment, and most pointedly, the organization's stance on Israel. They painted a picture of an institution in the throes of an internal civil war, with Kirk and Hammer on opposing sides of a critical ideological fault line. Was this the normal friction of a large political organization? The vigorous debate that is essential to any dynamic movement? Or was it evidence of a rift so deep and personal it could have catastrophic consequences? The digital sleuths of the internet needed no further direction. They descended upon Josh Hammer's social media history, and what they uncovered would become the single most viral and disturbing piece of context in the entire investigation. A tweet from Hammer's verified account, timestamped just one day before Charlie Kirk's death, was unearthed. The tweet contained only two stark words: public execution. The explanation from Hammer's team was swift. It was a historical reference, they claimed, taken entirely out of context, related to a long-past event and wholly unrelated to the tragedy that would follow. But in the superheated atmosphere of suspicion, context was a luxury that few were willing to grant. The phrase, public execution, now hung over the entire case like a pall, its ominous timing transforming it from a historical comment into a potential threat or a grim prophecy. The public reaction intensified, becoming a firestorm of accusation and defense. Some saw it as incontrovertible evidence of malicious intent, or at the very least, a chilling coincidence that demanded scrutiny. Others saw a man being unfairly crucified for an innocuous post, his words weaponized by a mob hungry for a villain. The leaked chats had provided a possible motive of ideological conflict. The tweet provided a jarring, emotional catalyst that cemented the suspicion in the minds of many. Yet the puzzle was still missing a piece. Ice Cube, continuing his own line of investigation, pointed to another, more shadowy figure within the leaked chats. An individual who was initially unnamed, referred to only by an identifier or title. Ice Cube claimed this figure was pivotal, a key conduit connecting the internal tensions at Turning Point USA to the powerful, hidden interests that he believed were ultimately responsible. Once again, the collective power of the online inquest went to work. The digital username was traced, the identifier decoded. The unnamed figure was revealed to be Rabbi Pasak Walitsky, a well-known lobbyist and political operative with deep, extensive ties to powerful pro-Israel advocacy groups and political donors. The revelation sent the investigation spiraling into a deeper, more complex stratum. A rabbi and lobbyist? What was the precise nature of his communications with Charlie Kirk and others within Turning Point? Why did his name appear at the heart of these internal disputes? His emergence suggested that the conflict was not merely philosophical, it was financial and political, touching on the very lifeblood of modern political movements: money and influence. The story was expanding from a personal or ideological betrayal to a narrative involving high-level lobbying and the immense financial pressures that shape American politics. From the fragments presented by Owens, Ice Cube, and the subsequent online investigation, a coherent, if terrifying, theory began to crystallize. The timeline suggested that in his final 24 hours, Charlie Kirk had made a fateful decision. He was preparing to take a monumental, and for some, unforgivable, stand. The theory posits that Kirk was going to publicly reject a massive influx of lobbying funds from certain powerful pro-Israel groups, funds that were conditional on unwavering support. His apparent shift in stance on his broadcast was not merely a rhetorical flirtation with nuance, it was the public manifestation of a private, principled decision to break free from the influence of certain financial backers. He was choosing ideological independence over the allure of almost limitless political capital. And that independence, the theory goes, made him a direct threat. A threat to billion-dollar political interests that are accustomed to compliance, not defiance. In this light, Charlie Kirk's final act of integrity may have been the very thing that signed his death warrant. It was a motive that transcended petty political squabbles and entered the realm of high-stakes geopolitical and financial realpolitik. This was no longer about a simple disagreement. It was about a fundamental challenge to a powerful ecosystem, and the alleged response was one of ultimate, brutal finality. A conspiracy of this scale, however, requires not only a motive but also a method. The narrative of a coordinated cover-up now began to find its foundation in a series of bizarre, logistical anomalies that emerged from whistleblowers within the event's planning committee, speaking to independent journalists under strict conditions of anonymity. Their testimonies painted a picture of an event subtly sabotaged from within. They spoke of deleted emails concerning critical security protocols, a last-minute, unexplained shift in Kirk's schedule that placed him in a specific, and perhaps more vulnerable, location at a precise time, and most chilling of all, the alleged, unexplained stand-down or reassignment of his personal security detail just moments before the incident occurred. The questions this raised were profound and pointed directly at a coordinated internal effort. Who authorized the schedule change that placed Kirk in harm's way? Who gave the order that left one of America's most prominent political figures suddenly and inexplicably exposed? These logistical failures suggest a plot that reached into the very infrastructure meant to protect him, corroborating Owen's claim of an orchestration. It painted a picture of a trap being set, with the victim meticulously guided into the kill zone by a hand he trusted. The mosaic was now nearly complete, each piece a dark tile forming a terrifying picture. A leader makes a principled stand against powerful financial interests, creating internal conflict with key advisors. One of those advisors makes a public statement that, in retrospect, reads as ominously prophetic or threatening. A mysterious lobbyist with ties to those same financial interests is involved in internal communications. Security is systematically stripped away at a critical moment. The resulting death bears the hallmarks of a professional assassin, and the official story remains a hollow shell, unable to account for the cascade of anomalies. The case of Charlie Kirk's death sits at a precipice, a dichotomy of modern politics. For a significant portion of the public, the evidence is overwhelming. The connections are too clear, the anomalies too frequent, the official silence too deafening. They see a brave dissident murdered for challenging a powerful system, his death covered up by a complicit network. For others, it is a textbook case of apophenia, the human tendency to see patterns and connections in random data. They see grief and pre-existing political distrust weaving a complex conspiracy from the threads of coincidence, a tragic accident, and the normal, if heated, internal debates of a political organization. The two realities are mutually exclusive, and the divide between them is a chasm that reflects the broader fractures in the body politic. There are no easy answers, only a growing list of unresolved, critical questions that hang in the air, demanding a resolution that may never come. What is the full, unvarnished story of Charlie Kirk's final 24 hours, beyond the curated clips and leaked chats? What was the precise context and intent behind Josh Hammer's public execution tweet, and why has its explanation failed to satisfy a massive segment of the public? What was the true nature and content of Rabbi Pasak Walitsky's communications with Turning Point USA officials, and what role, if any, did he play in the escalating internal conflict? Who specifically authorized the last-minute changes to Kirk's schedule and security detail, and based on what reasoning? Why does the official investigation appear, to many, to be lacking in transparency and urgency? The investigation continues to unfold in real time. New leads are promised, new leaks hinted at. The truth, as it often is in the shadows of power, remains elusive, buried under layers of money, influence, and fear. This story is far from its final chapter. What the next revelation will bring, whether it will bring clarity or deeper mystery, is a question that holds a nation of onlookers in suspense. The world is watching, waiting for an answer that may forever change the landscape of American political trust. The search for what truly happened in Utah, and in the days leading up to it, continues, a relentless pursuit in the face of immense and powerful silence.